Welcome to Speaking of Money. We are so excited you're here. Together, we're going to increase your financial IQ, we're going to work on your money mindset, and share tactical strategies on how to become not only financially independent, but financially free. You'll learn from me and other top industry leaders, and if you implement, I promise you will absolutely improve your financial life no matter where you begin. Let's do this. Hello, welcome to Speaking of Money. It's Jana Mannina here with Sam White. Sam is a mortgage broker and banker, and we have worked together since the early 2000s. He is consistently a top producer in a super competitive market with hundreds of millions of dollars in fundings, but more importantly, he's and his team have served thousands of families, with a huge percentage of them being first responders and other community heroes. This is a cause near and dear to Sam. He's a medically retired sheriff's deputy, and he continues to serve the community by serving those who serve. He's a husband, a father, an avid golfer, and one of the luckiest son of a guns we've ever met on the blackjack table. But he's also an expert in his field, and he's here to talk about buying real estate, living out the American dream, and some of the tips and tricks to assess if you're ready to buy, when the right time to buy is, and things that you can do to be preparing ahead of time. This is going to be a great and informative episode. Sam, thank you so much for joining us on our podcast today.
Well, thanks for having
me. You're welcome.
This is it's a nice new format we have here.
I love it. So I want to get right into what we're talking about, because people are always asking us, especially with a market that's ever changing, is if we should be buying or waiting. And we're seeing a lot of people standing still, which feels a little bit interesting for us in our business. So as you know, the media is all about controlling the narrative about buying a home. Every single day, people are being bombarded, right, with conflicting information. The interest rates are high, the interest rates are low, home prices are so high, this is amazing, the market is crashing. That's confusing as a home buyer. So I'm curious to know, how does someone look at all of this media, and do they assess the situation and say, what should I do? Should I buy? Should I not buy? What do I do?
Yeah, well, so there's a lot to unpack there, right? But the best advice I can give is know and trust the people that you work with, because the people that are making these decisions, our home buyers, our clients, maybe do this once, twice in a lifetime. And we do this kind of, every day, so to speak. We don't have closings every day, but, lots of days. So the media has basically paralyzed the markets in a lot of cases. Now, there's some misconceptions out there too. So everybody says, the summer buying season. Well, that's not really a factual statement. We see a lot of activity somewhat from February, March, up until the graduation start, or we, for a specific date, Memorial Day, we see a lot of activity. And we see, lots of offers, competitive bidding and all that stuff. But once Memorial Day happens and college graduations start and all that stuff, the summer really does slow down. And so I think we don't know yet. I think the fall is going to be very, very interesting. I think with interest rates going from essentially, 2.5% to 3% all the way to 6.5%, in a span of 6 months, and now, of course, they've receded back down somewhat as expected. The combination of that, the summer cold buying season where people aren't going to be buying, everybody's on vacation, and people have somewhat just paralyzed their decision making, and they're going to kind of sit tight and see what's happening. The media is absolutely doing us no favors, nor are they doing the buyers any favors. There's a gal on CNBC, Diana Olick, who's been basically saying for the last 6 years not to buy a house because it's in a bubble and all of that stuff. Well, guess what? In the last 6 years, it's darn near up 100%, real estate. So if you'd have bought 6 years ago against the advice of the so-called experts, you'd be up 100% on your investment. You'd have 6 years of paying down your principal. Your equity position would be super awesome. And you'd be in a great spot. So we got to be very careful about the quote-unquote experts that we listen to.
Do you think we're in a bubble right now?
I don't, actually. The one thing that you need to really cause a dramatic bubble pop like we had in 2008 is you need inventory. And yes, inventory is up 300% or plus from where it was a year ago. But guess what? A year ago, we had the lowest inventory in the history of inventory, and we are so we got a long way to go. The the other thing is we've got some demographic things that are kind of working themselves out. The average home buyer is 33 years old. 33 years ago, starting in 1988, 89, and 90, I believe, were the highest birthing years on record. So we have more household formations now than we've ever had, just as a demographic thing. You combine that with a generation of youngsters that haven't really bought homes. A lot of them lived in the city or lived in the urban areas for a little bit longer than they ordinarily were. Not a lot of getting married, not a lot of having families. That those ages have kind of continuously been going up, and certainly there's exceptions. But I think you've got several years of really, really high demand coming, and you combine that with a bunch of people that refinance down to 2.5% that are never going to sell their home unless they have serious financial windfalls. I mean, who's going to sell their home that their tax basis is at $500,000 and their interest rate's at 2.5% to buy a home that's got a $2 million tax basis and a 5.5 or 6% rate or 4.5, wherever you end up? The delta there in monthly payment is just, it's not appealing. So you're not going to have people selling their homes to move up, because the financial delta is really, really crazy.
Especially places like here, right?
So I don't think we're in a...
I said especially places like here, right? Where you're in California.
Yeah, places like here.
You're reassessed every time.
Yeah, California. Yeah, name a coastal region. And then you've got more people moving out of the city because of COVID. People realize if they're going to be locked down, they don't want to be in 800 square feet. They want to be in 3,500 square feet. In all of that fun stuff. But yeah, if you're in a high demand, low development area, I do not see a bubble happening.
That's probably great news for most people to hear, because that's, as you know, a conversation that so many people are having is, are we going to have a repeat of 2008? And, again, going back to the media, this idea of using these keywords like crashing and skyrocketing is very dramatic, and it evokes that sense of fear for especially people who lost in 08, right? People who...
Fear
absolutely.
Yourselves.
If you can click it, it's the ticket, is what they like to say, right? So if it's something that's so, we're really in for it. It's like that all the time. So as we navigate this new post-COVID-ish, right? We're kind of post-COVID-ish market, and we saw these record interest rates. That was true. They were really low. And, I remember when the Fed announced rates are going down to zero, and people are calling us, oh my gosh, are interest rates zero? They thought they were really going to get a 0% interest rate, and how excited they were. But it's an interesting thing that we don't look at the whole market, right? We don't look at everything that's happening in the market, and we're not able to assess that data because most of us don't have the market knowledge to see, okay, if the Fed has rates at 0%, what does that mean for everything else, right? And
combine that with the so-called experts completely misinterpreting and mispublishing not fake news, but really just really bad information with regard to the Fed raising interest rates and what that does to mortgage rates and all that stuff. It's just really bad information out there.
Well, since we're talking about that, this past week I had a conversation with a mom at school, and she was talking about, oh my gosh, the Fed's going to raise interest rates 0.75%. Rates are going up. And that's such a misnomer, because when we say rates, I think everyone thinks that rates are the same, right? That all interest rates are created equal. So when the Fed raises the rates, let's talk a little bit about what that really means for people, for consumers. What does that mean?
My favorite question: what's your rate? A phone call that asks me what my rate is. It's like that's an onion. Every the main factors that go into a mortgage rate are essentially credit score, equity, and income. So that's not a simple question about what's your rate. But yeah, with regard to the Fed, it would be my belief, and the people that I subscribe to, that they've been doing this a heck of a lot longer than I have. What happened with mortgage rates from essentially November of last year through now is an anticipation of inflation. Inflation is the enemy of bonds. Mortgages are packaged and sold as bonds. And stop me if I'm getting too technical here.
No.
But the enemy of mortgage rates is inflation. And just simple math, if your mortgage rate that somebody's buying, not the homeowner, but the investor, if the investor's buying your mortgage as an investment and it's at 3%, but inflation is at 9%, that person is losing 6%. until inflation gets under control. And we know that, inflation goes up and down. So this is a 30-year bond. Mostly institutions buy them, not really. You and I aren't going out to buy a mortgage. That's not what you and I are going to do as an investment. But when, the average rate of return over time will average 30 years of inflation data. But when inflation's going up and essentially is unchecked, so too must interest rates to get the desired return for the investor. In what we've seen in the last couple months, the worst kept secret in the world is the Fed is aggressively raising interest rates, and that is to combat inflation. So, what's the old saying? Your enemy's enemy is your friend, or something like that. So the Fed is raising rates to slow down inflation, and therefore, now that they've acted, mortgage rates are coming down in the anticipation that over time, the 30-year blended rate of inflation will be lower, not higher.
So when the Fed raises interest rates,
certainly,
does that directly impact mortgage rates? So is it like percent for percent, right? So that's the big misnomer. Fed raises the rates 3/4.
Right.
I thought I was getting 5. Am I now getting 5 3/4? No.
No,
right?
no, yeah, no. No. What it does affect, what it does affect, which people are going to feel in the pocketbook big time, more than a higher mortgage rate, is it does affect car loans, equity lines, credit cards, those types of things. So yeah, those are going to be painful. But with regard to mortgage rates, the toothpaste is out of the tube a little bit in anticipation of the Fed acting. Rates have gone up from 2.5 to 6.5, and now that they've started acting to lower inflation, now rates are starting to come back down. So this last 3/4 of a point in interest rate that the Fed raised has actually driven mortgage rates. A jumbo 30, I just looked at yesterday, is kind of in the mid-4s, which is, hey, I'll tell you what, historically that's pretty darn good. So if you talk to a 50-year-old or a 45 to 65-year-old, they're going to tell you how they used to think 6.5 was the best thing they'd ever see. So the fact that we're talking about rates are back down to 4.5, going back to, what we were talking about before, 4.5% interest rates are not going to cause a bubble pop.
First loan I ever did was 7 7/8 was the rate that they got. And they were coming from 11 and they were elated. Like there's a kid running around named Jana after that whole thing. She was pregnant at the time. Right. And it's so funny to think that we've gotten conditioned. And I think the same thing about gas prices. We're driving this morning and my son says, "Oh my gosh, Mom, we have to get gas here. It's only $4.95. It's only $4.95. Right. But if you would have said that to us 2 years ago or 3 years ago, we'd be like, "What are you talking about? Gas is, $3 or $2.99 or whatever the case is here in California."
Right. Yeah, God forbid you talk to a boomer and they talk to you about 18% interest rates under the Carter administration.
Totally.
That's obviously an extreme.
Yes, but the same principles in place, right? So I think the big fear for people is, are we going to have another 2008? Are we not going to have another 2008? And I think, like you were saying, that the conditions are not right for that. The conditions are not huge inventory and loans that are not being sold, right? People were punting their loans because they were fixed for 5 years or they had no skin in the game. And at the end of that 5-year mark, here it comes. And now their properties were so much less, they couldn't refinance out of it and rates were going up, right? So we don't have that situation, qualifications different, et cetera. So I think
Right. And I think the people that get in trouble, which there will be trouble. There is a recession coming. If not, we're already in it. It's the worst kept secret in the world,
what your definition of recession is, right? The ever-changing.
Depends what your definition of is. So you've got, you got recessionary pressures that are going to affect employment along the way. And when you start having employment losses and then we've gone from 2 job openings for every 1 person available. Now we're starting to have layoffs in the tech industry and the mortgage industry and banking industry and all that stuff. So the jobs data is going to be pretty interesting to see coming forward. But when you have an interruption in employment, you then start slowing down demand for housing. And then you also have people that are going to say, well, shoot, I lost my job, but they're not going to lose their house. They're going to sell their house. And that's going to be the minority of people, I would say. And the other reality is that I wish I had the stat handy, but I think it's like 99-something% of people are in an equity position that they can sell their home for a profit and not have any short sale or foreclosure or any of that stuff.
Which again is different, right? From 2008.
Totally.
People had no equity position.
2008, you had
nothing, right? They didn't put any money in. Yep. Then they had no equity position.
Right.
And then there's this huge flux of inventory.
Right, and for the most part, people who bought houses can have at one point qualified for their
Absolutely.
Loans, and under some of the most stringent qualifying conditions we've had in history. Obviously, it was normal lending down in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and before really. And then we got into the 90s, and we're letting 90s and 2000s where we're letting everybody get a house because it's the American dream and everybody do that. Well, guess what? Everybody can't afford a house.
Yeah.
That mortgage payment still has to be paid. So we're now in a position, it's a really nice somewhat equilibrium of people that can really afford to buy houses are buying houses, and the people who can't, they're in rent, and hopefully we can help those people who can't get prepared to do it down the road. For sure.
Do you think it's possible, we've talked about this a lot of times, just anecdotally, but people ask a lot, do you think it's possible to time the market where, home prices are low and interest rates are low and now is the time? So that there's a lot of this idea that that's somehow possible. What do you thoughts about that?
Right. I mean, absolute tops and absolute bottoms. I mean, it's just blind luck hitting them. I actually was lucky. I did sell my own personal house, and it appears that might have been the absolute top. But I'll tell you what, when we put the stake in the ground, we're going, man, this is early. I think it's going to be higher. It just by happenstance and luck, we sold it, and it worked out because now the neighbor's house went for $200,000 below. And the appreciation thing is an interesting thing. And what's your home worth, right? At the end of the day, your home is worth what someone's going to pay for it. But, we had a recent listing that got 9 offers. 8 of the 9 offers were right around asking at like $1.7 million. Well, somebody came in and wrote a 1.95 offer. So that's quite a bit above asking, 10, 15% above asking. Well, now the neighbor thinks that his house is worth 1.95. So then they go on the market, and now they're sitting, right? Because there were 9 people interested in the neighbor's house, but 8 of them were interested at 1.6 or 1.7, and only one overshot the mark or was sick of competing or needed to be in before school starts or they're having a baby, whatever their reason was for going all in. They created a price that is unrealistic. So it's going to be interesting to see what the data shows moving forward about going up or going down, appreciating or depreciating. Because I'd argue that house is probably worth 1.6, but now on record it's 1.9.
Sure.
So we could easily see a 15% back up from 1.9, but that's by no means a bubble pop. I mean, people are in so much equity at this point. I think it's going to be somewhat case by case. Timing the market is very difficult. You want to make sound judgment in both your living situation, and then obviously we'd love to have appreciation. But our generation, your and my generation, have it very different than our parents' generation.
No doubt.
Our parents' generation bought $200,000 homes or less, $90,000 homes at 17% interest, and by no doing of their own, mortgage rates came down to 6% or 7%, as we talked about. Well, that's huge demand comes in, and now these people that bought for $90,000 are selling for $2 million, $3 million, $1.5 million, and it's been a huge wealth building event for the baby boomer generation. And that's very much not our lives, right? Our lives we're spending a ton of money, but our interest rates are so low that actually the payments are not that different than our parents paid. But, are we going to have, 10x appreciation like they did?
In our lifetime?
I'd be far-fetched in our lifetime, probably
I don't
not.
think that my house is going to be worth $10 million ever. I mean, maybe not ever, but...
Never say never, but I would agree with you wholeheartedly.
It is a kind of interesting feeling when you think about... like you were saying about the parents and grandparents for that matter, and what percentage of their salary it was in relationship to their home price, right? So I like my grandparents, I remember my grandmother telling me like, oh, they made $7,500 a year, which is like, what are you talking about? But they paid $20,000 for their house. Right. So if we're buying houses for 1.5, the ratio would be we're making 750. Well, we know that's not really in alignment with most people. So it's this whole different ratio. It makes me wonder all the time why people are in a big hurry to buy houses. It seems like, I mean, it's from our side of the desk. It's like, I need to buy a house. It's this pressing sense of urgency. I need to buy. Where do you think this comes from? Do you think it stems way back to this idea of the American dream? Do you think that they're getting advice from somebody? Why are people who oftentimes are ill-prepared or unqualified, why are they trying to buy? Why is it so important to them?
Right. So we have a generation of home buyers now that are being told by their parents, again, it's an interesting concept, but they're being told by their parents, wealth is built through real estate. And I don't disagree with that statement per se. But again, what their statement is coming from a place of we bought for $90,000 and now we're worth 1.5, right? Well, that's not necessarily the case for our people that are buying now. So when's the right time is an interesting question. But I think what you also have is FOMO. I think you got fear of missing out. You got everybody's doing it. Everybody's getting married. Everybody's buying houses. Everybody, and it becomes the right time. I mean, I can tell you from my own scars, I bought when I was 25 years old. And guess what? That was the worst financial decision I ever made in my life. It was fortunate that I didn't put a 20% down payment. I rushed into it. I did 100% financing. It was a stated loan. It was all the felonies of 2005, 6, 7. I did for myself. And hindsight being 2020, 25, unmarried, unstable career is not the right time to buy. Now, fast forward, if I was 25 in 2008, could I have gotten lucky and bought something in 2008 for $400,000 and because I was ready, I thought I was ready, and all of a sudden that house is worth $1 million. So that's another instance of where timing is interesting. But people like to rush into this. They need, we've all seen it, writing 300,000 over asking, writing these crazy offers because they just have to get in. And that's not the best mindset to have going into this. You really want to make sound decisions with the advice of very good people. And that's not to say that now isn't a good time to buy.
That emotional piece where people there's a lot of feelings about that concept of home, right? Like this is home and I need to sink my roots here and I'm going to raise my children here. Especially I think for women, right? They're like, oh, I need a place. And, we're both married. Yep. We both have been through that process of like, you want to sink your roots in somewhere. Yeah, and I think
the nesting process is a real thing. I mean, it's just a real thing.
And that idea also, like you were saying, is that FOMO of, missing out. And I think a lot of people talk about, and we've had these conversations a number of times with our clients, is this idea that I don't want to miss my opportunity. This is my only chance. It will never come back again. And while I don't disagree in some ways that we'll never be here exactly this moment right now, the right time, in my opinion, the right time to buy is when you're ready to buy. The right time to buy is maybe it's a tiny stretch and you're eating beans for a couple of months, but, just to recuperate. But that's not your ongoing strategy, right?
Right. And it depends. I mean, the answer to the question is really it depends.
Yeah.
Right? It depends on your situation. At 23 years old, are you a nurse that's starting a 30-year career and you're going to make great money and more than likely you're going to have incremental raises for every year and you're going to make more than the next year? Same thing with law enforcement and firefighters and teachers and all that stuff. They've got really solid employment. They've got a really square head of what they want to do with their lives versus some 24-year-old that's, trying to make it on a under tour on a golf, playing golf and doesn't really know much, doesn't really know much about much.
For sure.
Two very different answers to the same question.
So I think that going back to what you said before, the key here is when you're trying to assess if you're ready to buy or if it's the time to make a real estate investment, it's really when you have to lean into people you trust, people to advise you. It's interesting, who people choose to trust. It's interesting how people discern what information is valid and what is not. And that feeling is so crazy because, you listen to your parents. What do our parents know? Maybe not to say that parents don't know anything, but at what point did our parents become financial experts or, our uncle or whatever? And we go to these people for this advice, but the advice is what worked for them and the time they were in.
Right.
We've talked about this a lot that, when people have this idea of, am I overpaying? I'm trying to time the market, this and that. I always tell people, I've owned my house when it was worth $1.1 million. And I've owned my house when it was worth $700,000. And if I had the right loan in place that I could afford come what may, with the exception of complete job loss times infinity, that it doesn't matter what your house is worth. That's just on paper and it's a feel good number, right? It's a feel good number.
Until you put a stake in the ground and sell it and that money's in your bank account, it's all fictitious money.
Isn't it? But it's interesting how people really hang their hat on it. They really when the market starts to go down, we're seeing that right now. If the market pulls back a little bit, people are like, oh my gosh, we're in a crisis. For what?
The consumer confidence number, I mean, there's all kinds of studies that the consumer confidence recedes considerably when home prices start going down, because when people think that even if they're not ever going to sell their house, my mom's actually a really good example of this. She always asks me, what's my house worth? You're never going to sell it anyway. What's it matter to you,
Yeah.
right? She's never going to sell that house. But with an exception of people who leverage their homes and their equity, I mean, people lose confidence when they feel like they're underwater or they feel like they're stuck.
Yeah.
That's another thing. If somebody put 20% down and things go back by 20%, they're going to lose money.
Mm-hmm.
Their hard-earned money that they put into it, down payment wise, they're going to lose that money if they sell, and they feel stuck. And that's a tough situation. And again, it just comes down to, as you said, who do you talk to? Who are your experts? And I can tell you almost certainly that, with few exceptions, it's not your parents. There's definitely people that are, we all know them. We all know the sharp parents that, I might go to somebody else's parents for advice. And of course my mom's given me great advice over time, my dad as well, but it's not, again, you're right. It's their situation that they're projecting on you, and it's just not the same situation. Our generation's buying mortgage payments for that, for the most part, not homes that are going to appreciate at 10x.
For sure. So getting into this idea about how you go about getting a mortgage, I want to get a little bit tactical, because as people are assessing, is it right time? Is it not the right time? Am I going to stay? Am I going to go? What am I going to do? I want to talk about when you're in a position to buy, because oftentimes people step on landmines when they actually don't need to. And we don't know what we don't know, like I always say. And there are things that we could be doing proactively to prepare as we're waiting for our houses to come on the market, or we're continuing to save money. What can we do? What do consumers need to know about, things like credit or underwriting or all of those little components? What do they need to really know to avoid the big daddy of those landmines, so they don't inadvertently, punish themselves, if you will, by making mistakes?
Yeah. I mean, credit is a huge deal. Managing your credit. I mean, I've got a long story about how I graduated college with, 580 credit, and, by no fault of my own, but at the same time, it really did. It makes everything in your life more expensive. It makes credit cards more expensive. It makes car loans more expensive. And then it makes mortgages much more expensive. And it will also eliminate you from some of the better programs that are out there if you got crummy credit. So managing your credit, and I mean, as you've done some great work and are going to do some great work with education on, starting when kids are younger. I mean, kids used to graduate high school with a basic understanding of what money is and how to balance a checkbook and what's credit card, what's compound interest, both earning and paying. And they don't have that now, and you get yourself in trouble. You could be, 24, and you got the free duffel bag at the student union because you signed up for a credit card, and that's cool and all, but what does that mean? What does that, how does a $500 credit card turn into paying, $200-300 a month in interest? And how does that wreck your credit? But credit is probably the main factor in really making your life more expensive or making it much more inexpensive.
So proactively, right? So there's some general rules of thumb about how to manage your credit. So proactively, I want to make sure that my credit is great, and I can monitor that, right? I can use Credit Karma. But to be clear, this is kind of a running joke if you're in mortgage, is that people like to, again, like with having a lot of equity in your property, these like vanity numbers. Oh, I have an 805 credit score on Credit Karma. But then when you actually pull the scores that banks use, it's really like a 740, or maybe it's lower.
Right.
But maintaining your credit is so easy now because you can see like by the minute what's being reported. So that's a huge thing people can do proactively is, managing their credit.
One of the best tips that I got in talking, we help our clients with credit restoration and repair often. Not as often as we used to, because everybody's in pretty good shape right now, but we used to do it a ton. And there's a couple misconceptions. A big one being, I want to pay my credit cards off completely. Well, paying your credit cards off completely will actually hurt your credit score. If you just use the credit card companies as a service, meaning you run up $5,000 in credit card debt during the month, but then you pay it off and you pay zero interest on that because you paid it off before it was charged any interest, you are not a good person to lend to, so your credit score goes down. because you're just using them as a service, not actually paying them interest, which would be considered a good one.
And not showing
yeah,
them how you are able to manage your credit, right? I think like
Right.
that part of that whole credit journey now is how do you use your credit? How do you utilize your credit? And that's assessed, right? Are you a
Right.
huge spender and then pay it off? Are you a moderate spender and then pay it down, et cetera? So I think all of those.
And one good thing I also tell people is call your credit card company and find out the day that they report the balances. And it's not the day that your payments due. It's different. So for instance, I have a Alaska Airlines credit card. It reports on the 10th of the month. My credit card, my payments due on the 1st of the month. And then I have a Costco Visa, just like everybody else.
Worst invention ever, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. And it reports on the 17th. And the reason that is important is for someone like me who doesn't have a ton of credit, I have car loan and I have a couple credit cards. If your published balance is over 30% of your available credit, or God forbid it's 60% of your available credit, my credit score can swing 80 points. 80 points. So it can go from 790 to 710, just because I made the payment on the 1st, but then I ran up some debt by the 10th, and then I paid off. And if you don't know when they're reporting, then you're kind of fighting with one hand behind your back. So I just make sure. Yeah, I set it up in my phone with a reminder of, hey, your credit card balance is going to show in 3 days. So, okay, where am I at? And I usually will pay it down to zero. For one of them, I pay down to zero, and the other one I pay down to $100. So I found the one with the lowest interest rate, and I pay that one down to $100 every month, and then I pay the other one to zero. And that single thing that I did, find out what the date they report is, and make sure I manage those balance, one at zero and one down to less than 30% of the available credit, will give you absolutely the best credit score that you can have at that time.
Agreed about that. It happened to me this month. I bought plane tickets and kind of forgot. I'm so diligent about making sure that I'm paying it down below 30%. I just completely forgot because I never used that card. And I get my little alert, your credit score dropped 72 points. I'm like, what? Did I forget to pay? Right. And it was just that. It's not late just because of the balance. So anyway, It's kind of interesting.
Right. And next month it'll be back up. And fortunately in this day and age, we can do what's called a rapid rescore if we need to. So if you did that and oh my goodness, you're about to buy a house, oh shoot, now I'm at 710 or 680 or whatever it might be, for the most part, with few exceptions, we can do what's called a rapid rescore where you can pay down your debt and then we can use the new balance. There's some intricacies. You might have to get on the phone and do a 3-way call with the credit agency and your credit provider, but we can fix that in essentially 24 hours, 24 to 48 hours.
It's really an awesome thing to do. So I want to talk really quickly before we go about two things. One is getting back to interest rates, because that's the question people are always asking you about, right? Interest rates. Mm-hmm. There are things that directly impact interest rates, like we just talked about, credit being one of them. And there are things that indirectly impact interest rate that consumers don't really have an understanding of. So when we talk to consumers, they often say something like, oh, well, I have $1 million in the bank and I've been at my job for 30 years. Doesn't that count for something? And it seems logical that would be the case. Right. Like, you look at this, I'm a good person. I do all these amazing things. Right. Shouldn't that impact my credit score? I mean, my interest rate, sorry. So aside from credit, when you're looking at what directly impacts people's credit score, when looking at what directly impacts their interest rates, what can they be super hyper aware of so that they can make sure that they understand if someone's either given them a line of nonsense or that they are in control of managing? What are the things that directly impact interest rates?
The three things that, not with regard to specific scenarios, meaning I'm buying a house and what's going to affect my interest rate, not taking into account what the Fed's doing or what's happening in the markets per se, but how you can put yourself in your best position. So and I don't want anybody to think that I'm projecting onto them how easy or hard it is to do. But, ideally you'd put 20% down on a mortgage. That's hard in California. That's very, very hard. So you might put 10% down. And then you can either pay mortgage insurance or you can do what's called an 80-10, where you do an 80% first and 10% second. Interest rates are made of risk. So when you have risk, a greater risk, meaning you've put less down payment or credit score, whatever it is. But in this case, if you put less down payment down, you're a bigger risk to the bank. Because if things back up 30%, you're going to say, well, hey, I only had 10% invested, so I'm going to give this thing back, because you don't want to wait around for it to come back. So you're just, not anyone specifically, but if you have put less than 20% down, you're a greater risk to the bank. So that will make your interest rate higher. You can certainly offset that with mortgage insurance, which will actually bring your interest rate kind of back down, because you're essentially ensuring that you're going to make the payments, and if you don't make your payments, the lender's made whole. But equity is an important thing. You put 20% down, your rate is X. If you put 25% down, your rate's going to be a little bit lower. And if you put 30% down, lower, 40, so on and so forth. And once you get kind of below 40% equity, 40% down, you have diminishing returns. It's not going to get so much better. You're already great. And the other thing that people don't understand is if I've got crummy credit and I only put 10% down, you're paying a max interest rate there. If I have perfect credit and I put 10% down, yeah, your rate's going to be elevated, but it's not going to be that bad. And then vice versa, if I'm putting 40% down and I got crummy credit, well, guess what? You have a mitigating factor. You have so much equity in that you're still, even though your credit's crummy, you're less risk to the bank. So you're going to get more towards that premium interest rate of really good, because your equity position is so good. And then, of course, reserves come into account. You have to be able to qualify, but also, that's a mitigating factor. But, gone are the days where I can look at Jana and say, Jana, you're a great person. You look like you're gainfully employed. We'll give you a loan, or just like a speeding ticket as it was in 2008. Press hard 3 copies when you sign the application, right?
Yeah.
So no data or any of that stuff. But 2008 took a lot of logic out of lending, for better and for worse. But one of those things is you got a 30-year history of paying your bills. You're self-employed. You take advantage of the tax laws as they are, and you don't report a bunch of income.
Or you could write it off, right? Like you have deductions against it. Yeah.
Yeah. That's, like I said, the tax law is what it is, right? I'm not saying to use it or don't use it, but it's there, so I would use it to your advantage. Certainly it's to our disadvantage often as we get crushed with taxes, so use it to your advantage when you can. But the trade-off for being a self-employed person that really does expense a lot of things through their company is you're going to have less income to qualify for a loan. So specifically for self-employed people, if you are in the lead up to buying a home, a year, 2 years, 3 years, you need to be thinking about it. You might want to pay some taxes for a few years so that you have income that we can use to qualify you for a loan. And even though these programs are starting to come back, bank statement programs, and it really is validation of income, but it's not the stated and crazy stuff that was happening back in the day. But these are starting to come back. But hey, guess what? You're a greater risk to the bank, so your interest rates are higher.
Well, I think that
you want to qualify for perfect financing if you can.
For sure. And I think that's the thing that people don't understand is different banks, like any other company, have a sweet spot, right? They have a sweet spot for what they like. So I might be a bank that likes low equity position and really bad credit because I can charge more interest on that. Or I might be a bank that is top notch. I only take a really, really high equity position and great credit, whatever that looks like. Right. And depending on the bank that you go with, or depending on the number of asks, if you will, that you have, your circumstances that you have, it can really shrink your pool of available investors, which then kind of puts you at the mercy because of supply and demand, right? It puts you at the mercy of what's available for you. For sure.
Competition in every instance will bring down cost, right?
Yes.
That's whether you're buying a hair product, whether you're buying a car, whether you're buying whatever, or buying a mortgage loan. If you have more people competing for your business, your interest rate's going to be better. So putting yourself in that position with good income, good credit, and as much down payment as you can scrape up, that's really how you're going to put yourself in position, and that's when you're kind of, circling all the way back. That's kind of when you're going to know it's time to buy.
So we see this a lot, and I'm really deeply passionate about this last 2 little pieces here. The first one is when people are comparing interest rates. So going back to what you said, what's your rate? And which, just so everyone knows, and it's like not unclear, when you call somebody who's a human and you say to them, what's your rate? it's never received well because there's so much, like we were just talking about, there's so much data and so many data points that go into determining what your interest rate is. What is your credit score? How are you paid and how long have you been paid that way? What's your equity position? Et cetera, et cetera. There's so many data points. Where are you buying? What type of property are you buying? What's your credit score?
Right.
It's not what's your rate. It was kind of conversation. So now you have people going online and they're checking out some of the companies
Bankrate.com
or Rocket Mortgage or Better or whatever. They're looking at these online rates and they're not putting in all the data points. And so it's just because they want that immediate gratification of spitting out a rate. Right. I'm a consumer. I don't really understand everything. And now I have all these rates in front of me. You and I've seen this a million times. It just happened to me a week ago. Somebody said, this lender is giving me 3/8% better in rate. And I said, oh my gosh. And then here was the giveaway. My cash to close is only $2,100. I was like, okay. Can you send me what they sent you? And what they were doing was financing all the other costs into the loan. So the principal balance, as I had it, was $500,000. And at the new company, their principal balance was going to $540,000. That's how much they were going to pay in fees to get this lower rate. So I'm a consumer. How do I know what's what? How do I compare? How do I assess the data that may or may not be accurate? What do I do? What's the process?
You're going to hear a recurring theme as we move forward in this conversation, which is know and trust the person that you are borrowing $1 million from. Seriously, yes. I can't say that loud enough. I can't say it loud enough. I will say that the government and the feds, for better or for worse, have really done their best to try and make it so we can compare apples to apples. When you call Wells Fargo or you call us, that you can really compare apples to apples. Unfortunately, they didn't set the rules the same for a retail bank as they did a brokerage or
mortgage bank,
a mortgage bank like we are. So it's not perfect, but you want to have your trusted source. And I say frequently, some people have relationship banking with their banks or whatever it is that they get a quote unquote special rate. My favorite one is the builder that offers you a $6,000 incentive towards your countertops for using their in-house lender. And that's too good, too cheap not to buy. And then we end up getting these loan estimates. It's like, holy cow, did you even know that you were paying this? And there's this concept that the builders, lenders are giving you better rates. At the end of the day, we're all aggregating loans and selling them to the same people, Fannie and Freddie, and then your major jumbo investors. So it really is somewhat of a popularity contest. But you can be sold a bill of goods. If you are not sure of what you're buying, just like me walking onto a car lot is not the right answer. I'm going to get sold the worst. I'm going to pay more and get less, which is why I use a car broker. That's a whole nother subject. But you want to know and trust your people. And we've built our business just the same way you have, on referral. So I'm making sure that, you're getting a good deal so that you tell all your friends you got a good deal. And God forbid you find out you didn't get a good deal, you're not going to refer anybody to me. So you want to find somebody that works by referral. Maybe you don't see their face on a billboard as you're driving into town, because they've got relationships that they've built through honesty, integrity, and that kind of stuff. But what you really want to get from the person that you're getting quoted is a loan estimate. And you can put two loan estimates side by side, and that's going to be your best chance to compare apples to apples. It's not going to be apples to apples depending on who your lenders are, because those lenders have to disclose different things. But use us as a resource. Use somebody that's trusted. Even call them and say, hey, I just need you to look at this. Some people do it. Some people tell you, well, if you're not using me, I'm not going to waste my time. But for the most part, I always tell people, use me as a resource. If I'm not going to be your guy, use me as a resource. It takes me 5 seconds to look at a loan estimate and figure out where you're getting screwed. And you may not even be able to recognize that it's happening as a consumer. So
how do you find your person? I'm new to the area. I don't know really anybody, or I'm new to buying. What am I? Should I ask certain questions? Should I do certain things?
Right.
What do I do?
It's an interesting question, right? Because I would say 10 years ago, going onto Google and see who's got the best 5-star reviews is a great thing. Well, guess what? You can buy those 5 stars now. So the
Totally.
person that's willing to spend the most money is going to be your 5-star that shows up in your SEO and all that stuff. So I wouldn't say that Googling right now is a good idea. There's a few different places on social media. If you're in a town, you can hop on their local page, say, hey guys, anybody have a good experience with a local lender here, and vet them. I mean, vet them. Realtors are a good source for loan officer referrals, the same way loan officers are great resources for realtor referrals. But it's not one layer of vetting. You need to go deep. You need to go to 2-3 levels. Ask them for a reference. Ask them for somebody that you can call and ask how it went. Now, again, with that, I'm never going to put somebody down as a reference that didn't have a good experience, right? So you kind of got to take that with a grain of salt too. But if you can formulate a few good questions that you can ask these people, these references, it's great. And combine that with some Google research. You combine that with, what's their parent company or who their main lenders are that they broker to. You can kind of narrow it down, but really at the end of the day, you want somebody close to you that's giving you a personal referral, and because they've already transacted together and it's gone well, it was a positive experience, that's as strong of a vetting level as you can do. A personal referral is absolutely the best you can do.
I always like to tell people that, we get calls all the time, randos that want to talk to us. And I think that one thing that we underestimate when we're shopping for any kind of service provider is how do we feel when we talk to them, right? How did that person make me feel? And after all the transactions that we have done over all these years, when you get off the phone with anyone on our team, and there's so many wonderful mortgage companies around the country, you feel held and supported, and you feel guided, and you feel like, you know what, they really do have my best interest in mind. They've been transparent with the process. They've spent the time. They've really, for lack of a better phrase, held my hand. And I think that is such an underestimated experience in one of the most emotional times of people's lives. And when people
are spending a crap load of money. They're spending a ton of money, and this is the biggest financial decision they've ever made, more times than not. And they're going into $1 million worth of debt more times than not.
Sure,
maybe 500, but proportionately, it's a big deal. And I can't fathom to this day how. I mean, yes, it's kind of a slick process. I'm not going to lie to you. Being able to get on your phone with Rocket Mortgage and have a quote unquote pre-approval in 10 minutes or whatever it is. I mean, as an aside, you can do that with a normal mortgage broker too. But what they're selling, it sounds slick, but guess what? That person's not giving you advice. If one thing goes wrong, try and call them.
They don't know, right? They don't, like, you put in what you make. This happens all the time. We're pre-qualifying somebody on the phone, and how much do you make? Oh, I make $350 a year. Okay, cool. And then you get down to it, and they start submitting their income, and it's like, oh, well, you don't really make $350. You really make $100,000, and you got this one-time bonus, and then they gave you a stock option. That doesn't mean that's what you make, right? And if you're just inputting data, those are the landmines.
Right. So knowing your income. That's a great point we didn't cover in the last question or couple questions ago. Knowing your income is important. Okay, I make this much base, I make this much bonus, I get this much stock options. Okay, how much of that can I use? And if per se I'm going to qualify, and oh my God, I'm going to switch jobs and I'm going to get paid so much more. Well, guess what? If you switch jobs, you can't use your bonus income for a year. Mm-hmm. So you need to know that.
That is such a bummer. That's such a bummer. And I mean, it makes sense from an underwriting standpoint that, you haven't gotten your bonus yet. We don't have no history, because underwriters can only look at your history, right? They can try to foresee the future, but when they're looking at your history and you don't have any, even though you've gotten bonus working for XYZ company, well, they don't know what your history is with the new company, so they exclude that. That's such a bummer for from a consumer standpoint, but you can understand from a banking standpoint.
It's incredibly impersonal, both in a good way and bad way. Yeah. It's not like this underwriter doesn't know that you're going to get this bonus. You took the job. You took a better opportunity. You're going to make more money, but guess what? Until you show it on paper, it's nothing personal. You ain't making it.
That's a good point. That feeling of being personal. People have this really interesting misconception that there's like somebody who's like making a judgment. Somebody who's there like, oh my gosh, they'll tell them that the reason that this happened is because of whatever. That's happening behind the scenes, but the underwriter is checking boxes. Does this make sense? Does it meet the guideline? Check, 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 check. It's a non-emotional experience for the underwriter for all intents and purposes, right? It's really a non-emotional thing. They're not deciding if you're a great human, unlike in the old days, which I don't know when this ended, but certainly men would walk into banks and they'd meet their banker and they'd shake hands. Oh yeah, John, we got you covered. Don't you worry, without doing anything. It's a very different process now. So I think, like we were saying, that picking someone that you feel great with, that you've vetted a little bit, that you've spoken with, that has held you and guided you and given you advice to, it's not always the best thing to do. Like we've said before, taking the lowest interest rate is not always the best thing to do. That's counterintuitive, but it's really not. And so getting advice that sets you up for long-term financial success and also wealth building is a huge pinnacle part of the mortgage process. And it's something that people don't talk about.
Personally, one thing that I really respect is somebody that's willing to give the opposing view. Okay, yeah, let's buy, let's get, because we get paid by commission, right? We're mortgage brokers. If we don't sell, we don't get paid. Well, guess what? I can't sleep at night if I don't look at somebody and say, okay, borrower A, what happens if the market goes down? Are you going to be comfortable staying here for 10 years until your equity position is built back up, either it's appreciated, you pay it down? What does that other side look like? Because it's very easy to sell rainbows, fairy tales, and unicorns. I mean, it is the easiest thing in the world, especially for the last 10 years. Last 10 years is, I mean, you could just say, yep, things are going to go up, you should buy. Now we're getting to that point. It's like, okay, well, let's present this opposing view. I don't think there's going to be a bubble pop, but guess what? It could go down 10, 15%. Certainly could stop appreciating. So if you're buying this to double your investment, maybe now's not the time.
Yeah,
if you're buying something to live in and you're making a sound financial decision and you can afford it and you're not going to be house poor, what's your food budget look like? If your mortgage is going to be $3,500 a month, what's that leave you for food? That's
talking about that's huge, right? What are you going to have left over? And are you going to have children? And you might not. I always tell people, get out your proverbial crystal ball and look ahead right now that you do not have any children and you do not have these expenses, but you just got married. So in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, that could change. Are you going to work during that time? If you are not going to work, great, take out that income. If you are, you've got childcare to consider. Those are all the things that I think are overlooked oftentimes when you're choosing a professional, is the value of that advice and that leadership. The last thing I want to leave with is this idea, like we were speaking about getting people into your circle that can advise you. We talk a lot about building a team, and I want to just from your perspective, I have some ideas about it too, but I think who should be on one's team, whether you're ready or you're not ready yet, who you should be looking for. And I know the younger people aren't going to know what I'm talking about, but whose business card should you be putting in your Rolodex so that so that when the time comes, you're like, you know what? I met this amazing realtor. I met this incredible loan officer who, whatever that is, who else goes in that? So loan officer, a realtor, a CPA.
Insurance is a big one. I mean, insurance is kind of funny because you don't use it unless you need it. But I would tell you, I'm obviously we deal with homeowners insurance a ton. But somebody that can really set you up with life insurance, whereas, my wife is, if I, God forbid, get in a car wreck, I want to make sure that house gets paid off. And you want to make sure that you have a life insurance person. You want to make sure, even, again, how do they make you feel? A financial advisor, a lot of these guys, I only take accounts of $100,000. I think that's incredibly short-sighted. I think you got 24 and 25-year-olds that will be loyal to you for life if you start a little IRA for them with $4,000 or $5,000 and somebody that's willing to invest in you at your. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, isn't that the dang truth that if you have somebody who's like, I only take you at, this huge investment, I think that's so counterintuitive because you're like, well, wait, you have no confidence in your ability to help me grow my wealth then? You don't start out with here's 100 grand, here's 500,000 unless you're getting some sort of, something extraordinary happens for you.
But I get it. I mean, you have a book of business, and sometimes you can't bring just every Tom, Dick, and Harry on and all that stuff. But with regard to all of these providers, find somebody that's going to invest in you and is invested in bringing you from point A to point B. Again, starting with a $5,000 IRA account, giving you good advice as, okay, well, now you own a house, you got to up that life insurance policy. Somebody that would proactively call you and say, hey, I got my eye on you guys. You guys bought a house. You need to make sure you get $1 million policy. So not only do you have the $1 million that your spouse is going to get if you kick, but now you're going to get $1 million and pay off the house.
For
right?
Sure.
So you want to make sure you have that person in your life, financial advisor, life insurance, certainly realtor that's not your sister. You want a professional. And not to say that somebody's sister might be the best realtor in the world. I don't know that. But just as an example, specifically in 2005, 6, 7, I think there was like 30,000 realtors in Marin County or something like that. And
something crazy.
There was only like 500 transactions that happened a year. So 29,500 of them weren't doing anything. But then you go, it's like, oh, your sister will write an offer for you. Well, guess what? That's not doing yourself any
No one
favors.
knows your sister. Yeah, for sure. And you'll probably pay more. One thing, I think that's a really good vetting question, going back to our last one really quick before we go. And that is when you're talking to somebody, especially somebody who works on commission-based income, you must do everything you can to make sure that their ability to pay their house payment or their car payment that month is not hinging on your one thing, because
Correct.
They're not able to make arbitrary, sound decisions when they need that commission so bad. For us, I mean, I can't tell you how many people we have that we pre-approved years ago that they've been getting ready this whole time. I don't care when somebody transacts. Ever. I never care. It doesn't matter to me. Is it awesome when they do? Absolutely. But my ability to pay my bills is not hinging on them. And the same would be true for somebody who's selling life insurance, somebody who is a realtor for sure. A CPA, if they have 3 clients, it's probably not your person. You want to make sure somebody has a sound, operating, working business that has experience, that's been doing it. And we'll put some stuff in the show notes here, but I think really spending the time to start building your team, it's like, Sam probably won't relate to this, but it's like when you have to go shopping to find the perfect dress and you've got an event on the weekend, that is not the time to go shopping. The best time to go shopping for your perfect dress is you just happen to be walking through Nordstrom and you see the perfect dress and you click it right into your closet and now you have it and it's ready to go. The same is true for your people and gathering your people.
You build this over time. You're building your people. You're building your network. And like you said, the last thing you want to be is in contract to buy a home and not have a loan officer identified, that you haven't already established your parameters. You haven't already figured out what's what. You just want to be as proactive. And none of these things that we've talked about, if you never transact in real estate, nothing that we've talked about is going to be futile. It's all going to be worth it even if you never transact. Having good credit's never a bad thing. Knowing what your budget is and saving is never going to hurt you. They're all really good habits and awesome. It also sets you up to be a perfect home buyer.
I think that's true of when you're thinking about building your team as well. Because remember that all of us, whether you work in our field or you work in any other field, you're part of a community and you're part of somebody's team also. And when you set up your web, regardless if you're a nurse or you're a police officer or you're a teacher or are a garbage collector or you're a house cleaner, you want to have everyone that you can in your network, because that network is what's going to keep you financially sound and safe times the rest of your life. And that's where your best referrals are coming from. And that's where your best support is coming from. So I think that's key. Sam, thank you so much.
Thinking with a clear mind.
Yes, for sure. Thank you so much for doing this today. Thanks for all of the great information. I know this is going to be really helpful for some consumers and people that are looking, especially to get started on their home buying time. I appreciate your time. If you want to reach Sam, tell him how to get a hold of you and what you need to do if they'd like to talk more to you.
Yeah, I'm pretty findable on social media. Cell phone and email are great.
Are you at Sam White? Is that right?
I am
social?
at Sam White Loans on social. At Sam White Loans. I'm sure Jana will put my contact info in the meeting notes.
Will. I will.
This has been great. I can't wait to see where this goes for you. I think it's fantastic,
Thanks.
and I'd love to come back and chat once some of this stuff develops. I mean, the next 6 months will be really cool.
Yeah, it's good to have partnerships like this. Thank you again, and have a great drive today.
Thanks, Jana.